bank records of the Deputy Chief Justice using a court order that had no bearing to the case whatsoever. Now the DPP, Nuruddin Haji, and DCI George Kinoti are already planning to appeal that decision. Here's Timothy Otieno with the details.
It's been a fight in an effort to clear her name that has been going on for 9 months now, pitting Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu against the Director of Public Prosecutions Nuruddin Haji and his colleague from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations George Kinoti, both of whom initiated criminal cases against the Deputy President of the country's apex court. But Friday afternoon, and a 5-judge bench would turn the tides in Mwilu's favor on a technicality discovered in the manner in which the DCI and the DPP had acquired bank records of Mwilu whilst investigating claims of obtaining security using false pretenses from a local bank.
Evidence underpinning the intended prosecution of the petitioner in Nairobi Chief Magistrate Court, ACC Criminal number 38 of 2018, Republic versus Philomena Mbete Mwilu and Stanley Muluvi Kima, was illegally obtained in a manner that was detrimental to the administration of justice.
The DCI obtained access to her accounts on the basis of a misrepresentation by using a court order that was not obtained in respect of her accounts.
At no time would the DCI or any other state agency act contrary to the dictates of the law, and more so with regard to intrusive investigations that require sanction of the court.
Conspicuously absent during today's ruling was London-based barrister Kawar Qureshi, who had been leading the case against Mwilu even as the High Court watered down accusations against her as being civil and not criminal, thus recommending the matter to be taken up by the Judicial Service Commission.
Cases involving misconduct with a criminal element committed in the course of official judicial function or which are so inextricably connected with the office or status of a judge that they perforce must be deemed to be official misconduct must first be referred to the body responsible and the disciplinary or removal process commenced.
An advice that Nuruddin Haji and George Kinoti are seemingly heeding, with both promising swift legal redress.
We as ODPP will be filing a complaint to the JSC on her conduct and at the same time appealing on this ruling that was issued today.
The quashing of the charges which had threatened to compromise Mwilu's position at the country's judicial table is most likely to be viewed as a setback to the DPP and the DCI, even as they explore the appeal option. The criminal prosecution against Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu may have been thrown out on a minor technicality, but the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is not throwing in the towel just yet. Through their lawyers, they are promising to appeal this particular directive and offer up fresh charges against the second highest ranking judicial officer in Kenya. Timothy Otieno, KTN News.
Thank you, Timothy. Let me get your quick reactions on this. A lot of things coming to the fore. What are the DCJ's options? Is it judiciary protecting one of their own? Is DPP's, an indictment on the DPP's work? Is it an affront on the DPP's office?
Well, you remember the former Deputy Chief Justice, Nancy Baraza, went home simply by pinching somebody's nose. And I think that's when people began to appreciate the import of the new constitution. And in my view, anybody who is serving in public office, wherever people cast aspersions on your integrity and ability to serve, wherever your reputation is being dragged through the mud, you're supposed to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. There's no way you'll be serving Kenya in that kind of a position, and then you do not pay attention to Chapter 6 and Article 10 of our Constitution. And in my view right now, what the Deputy Chief Justice ought to do is quickly put together a resignation letter and go home, because it's going to be a mess. You know, like Wetangula said, it's going to be messy and there are going to be many casualties. But really, the important point now we need to ask ourselves, or rather the important question is that who wants Justice Mwilu out? and what is the reason that why do they really want her out? And in my view, if somebody wanted Mwilu out of the judiciary, they should have called her for a private cup of coffee and said that we want you to resign. We are going to offer you a position as an ambassador somewhere. You know, majority of the people who are getting pulled out of the system, they get offered those positions. Like, for instance, there's one called Mubea who is going to, I think, Ireland, such kind of things. Because you cannot afford to have somebody in the level of the Deputy Chief Justice being dragged through the courts and going before our juniors, you know, going to magistrates courts and going to everybody else. Because, you know, her presence alone intimidates everybody. And then number two, it's very obvious that the judiciary will be defending one of their own. And I can almost predict that this case will probably take another 50 years to be concluded, because the lawyers will keep on coming with fresh petitions, with fresh injunctions, with everything else. And the judges, you know, without doubt, they'll want to protect one of their own. But the key issue which came out of that judgment is that for Kinoti and Haji going forward, if you're going to get evidence, then it must be secure. You have to get it through the approved means. If you're going to use some sort of voodoo stuff to get the evidence, nobody's going to take it to the bank.
Mark, what jumps at you from this?
Well, the first term that jumps at me is technicality. And technicalities have been used to beat the justice in this country many times. So it is unfortunate that that term is coming up again. Secondly, for Justice Mwilu, I think she's in quite a bit of trouble. This may seem to be a reprieve now, but let's remember that if she does go through the JSC route, then she's likely to face the same evidence that has been thrown out being brought back, and then now being discussed in quite a public manner as to how she transacted, because these are bank transactions, and how she managed to access resources that you and I can only dream about when her salary was known. Number two, if she then says that she would like to go through a tribunal, that is even much worse. So the reprieve that, yes, you're not going to go before a court, at least in the foreseeable future, is only short term, because now she has to consider whether she wants to risk her reputation or she wants to take an option where you take lighter duties and you go and do something else. That is the question she's got to face. But as a country, we have to take this case into close consideration. Number one, is it okay, as Dismas has indicated, for the judiciary to simply want to protect one of its own because it can? Okay, that's a key question. Number two, we know that no one is above the law in this country.
Yes.
And therefore, even Maraga himself, for a traffic offense, should be seen at the local magistrate's court in Kilimani, having to address the fact that he was overspeeding, if that is what he did. Because we must come to a place in this country where your position is no insulator against the laws of the country, because that in itself is a form of impunity. Beyond that, we must address ourselves to the question that the DCI and DPP, what are they doing to fight corruption? Because one of the things that they must begin to do pretty quickly is the use of molds and sleeper agents who gather information around a cartel and a ring for years before you come out, because the evidence has been gathered systematically, legally, and it's admissible before a court of law.
Very quickly, Genotich, let me get your reaction to this.
I want to take us a bit further back to a very famous statement called "We shall revisit," and also the issue of calling Maraga and his team Wakora and so on and so forth. I think this humiliation of Justice Mwilu was an attempt, a successful attempt, to startle and rattle the judiciary into remembering who calls the tune. I believe that at the end of the day, and I'm not here to say whether she's guilty, not guilty, that the bungling of this case again by the DCI and ODPP, and this is a habit. We see it with NYS, we've seen it with the Transformers and KPLC. There's always something that they seem to be doing wrong somewhere that on a technicality sees the case either put on hold, put on ice, or dismissed, and so on. So I think it was very deliberate. I don't think there's any real attempt, as Dismas said, they'll be embroiled in litigation for the next I don't know how many years, and it'll never come to an end. But I just want to say something. The judiciary always protects its own. Muturi protects the legislators. President Kenyatta is protecting the CSS. Who is protecting Wakenya? And that is where I want to take it. So this is just part of a trajectory, setting and ensuring that the judiciary is well aware of where it needs to go with the proposed referendum upcoming and elections 2022, and reminding them that if they so much as decide to deviate by half a centimeter, they shall be reminded. So Justice Mwilu, as a potential next successor when Maraga retires, I don't know, but that would have been seen, make it impossible for her, as my brother here has said, make it impossible for her to run, because there's so much sullying and dirtying of her reputation that she has no option but, as you are saying, but to resign. But I see it as part of a bigger plan to remind the judiciary that it is captured and it should behave, but the judiciary is fighting back.
So
and everyone is fighting back, but nobody is fighting for Kenya.
All right. We'll see how this goes, that appeal by the DPP's office. If indeed the DCJ will step down, Kenyans will be watching and waiting to see. Now, let's cross borders or go to the border at very least. Relations between Kenya and Somalia remain on the rocks following the reinstatement of the mandatory Wajir flights stopover and revoking of a Kenya entry visa agreement. The Kenyan government is yet to respond to a letter by the government of Somalia raising concerns over what the Federal Republic terms as a contravention of a neighborly bond, which has a potentially destabilizing impact.
For two neighboring countries, Kenya and Somalia, relations have not been without tension, and the month of May has opened another chapter in the diplomatic spat between the two countries. First, it was the suspension of direct flights from Mogadishu to Nairobi on the 11th of May. The direct flights were allowed 2 years ago under an agreement that partially lifted decade-old restrictions imposed as part of security measures. Under the new agreement, diplomatic passport holders were allowed to get visas on arrival at the JKIA, while ordinary passport holders acquired visas from the Kenyan embassy in Mogadishu.
The government of Kenya is saying because of the security concern, we not allow the Somali, citizens, directly coming from Mogadishu to Nairobi. They have to pass through Wajir. From Wajir, then they can come to Nairobi.
The Kenyan government moved to enforce that. Somali parliamentarians who hold diplomatic passports were denied entry into Kenya earlier this month. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs termed it as normal operating procedure.
All of us travel with visas, So if you really don't have a visa, it's very difficult to enter a country X.
Somalia is not taking it lightly.
They are saying we're no longer attending any international conference in Nairobi to avoid for further humiliations.
In a statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Somalia says the actions contravene the neighborly bond that exists between Somalia and Kenya. The government of Somalia, therefore, calls on the government of Kenya to consider the potentially destabilizing impact of these actions and to uphold the long-standing relations. Somalia, according to analysts, was caught off guard by the recent moves.
But the Somali government is saying if the Kenya withdraw that agreement, it was better to inform us early enough.
The latest diplomatic tiff coming just over 3 months before the September ruling by the International Court of Justice on the Kenya-Somalia maritime boundary dispute. Somalia moved to the ICJ in August 2014, accusing Kenya of grabbing part of its maritime territory. Somali's claim carves out a triangle which stretches for 100,000 square kilometers, currently occupied by Kenya. The developments, analysts argue, call for dialogue to try and resolve the latest row before the historic ICJ maritime dispute ruling, which could further deepen tensions between the two countries with trade and security ties at risk. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
Thank you, Rita. So small international incidents that are pointing to a wider issue here between Kenya and Somalia. As Kenyans and Somali people continue to wait for that ruling by the International Court of Justice. We have been trying to understand this, make our viewers understand this. Jerotich, you know a bit more about this. What really is the problem between these two countries?
I think The first thing I would want to ask Kenyans, as we're busy, I saw the someone tell Somalia hashtag that was trending for a while, is to ask Kenyans, what is really the objective between, in this fight between the two countries over this maritime area that is disputed or that is in dispute? What is the objective? What is our dog in the fight? Ultimately for me, I'm not somebody who believes that Kenya should lose an inch of its territory, but I'm also not someone who believes that another country should lose an inch of its territory. As far as I understand this dispute, it should be settled at the ICJ. There's been a lot of spinning in the past weeks showing how the ICJ might be compromised and that the ICJ is not the right body to adjudicate this matter. But at the end of the day, if Kenya has nothing to hide and Somalia has nothing to hide, and this is really a dispute, they should allow it to be settled up there. But let's ask ourselves a few questions. This is about 17 quadrillion cubic feet of biomass. And suddenly, two countries are busy angling over that 23,000 square miles of land there. I see a lack of coherence on the part of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in terms of its handling of this issue. If they have all suddenly realized that this parallel versus diagonal line that is the point of the dispute is a space where there is a lot of biomass, who are we going to fight? The multinational corporations that are there that have an interest. There's Turkey, there's Qatar, there's the UK, there's Norway. They are all inside that story. Do we understand whether Siad Barre had already sold these blocks before he was deposed? The history is deep, it's dark, it's sordid, and here we are at the front saying, oh, we must fight for our territory, this is our territory, we own it. What is our interest there? What do we ever benefit from oil blocks and exploration in any case? Right. And this whipping up of xenophobia, this weaponizing of nationalism to say Somalis are this, Somalis are that, I'm sure on the other side it's also being said as well, is very unwise. This is a volatile and sensitive geopolitical location, and we have to be careful as Ministry of Foreign Affairs to not escalate. And this is what I think is happening, it's escalation. And so while we are not aware of the deeper issues, is Total inside this game? Yet Total moved its pipeline through Uganda. Were they aware of a potential dispute between Uganda and Kenya? And when Kenya in 1979 had that MOU that agreed for the parallel line, yes, this was at a time when Somalia was busy trying to invade Ogaden. There were all kinds of problems. So obviously Somalia was very busy inside its own problems. But eventually when they realized what was happening, they came out and said, look, this is a situation where we no longer accept the parallel line, we want it diagonal. And on it goes. But long and short of what I'm trying to say is I see no coherent strategy on the part of Foreign Affairs, and I expected a lot more. All right.
Mark, could this get a bit more complicated than this in terms of the relations between the two countries? Is Nairobi playing hardball, seemingly? Could this make things even worse for us?
Nairobi playing hardball? No, I don't think so, because they need to be playing hardball. They've not started. And that speaks to the strategy that Jerotich is talking about. So let's start here. We must start at the independence of Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia and other countries. We need to understand that most African countries agreed that the borders of those countries will be what the colonialists set. There's one country that did not agree. That country is Somalia. Now, when I say that country is Somalia, I'm not talking about the people of Somalia. And we need to be very clear, because the dispute is between Kenya and Somalia, not between Kenyans and Somalis. Okay? Now, that being clear, when Somalia did not do this, we must also remember that
Somalis is the ethnic group. Somalians
is a country of Somalia. Yes. Now, the country of Somalia has been at war several times with Kenya and with Ethiopia concerning territory. Let's not forget that we lived through the Shifta War, which was an expansionist idea that wanted to bring Somalia as far as Meru. Okay, that ideology is not dead, not in Somalis, but in the people who hold power in Somalia. Okay, now if you fast forward this conversation through 1979, 1980, and 2003 and 2008, Kenya moved to create that parallel line that was parallel to our border, our maritime border with Tanzania. Now, why is this important? It is important because both Tanzania and Somalia have much greater coastline than we do. In fact, if that diagonal line is put into place, Kenya would effectively be a landlocked country because any ship entering Kenya would have to pass through Somali waters to get into Kenya. Now, that is not something that is just about oil. It is not just about personal pride as Kenya. It is something that we must understand, that we must defend every inch of territory that belongs to us, not against the Somali, but against Somalia. And that interest is devoid of our political divisions and arguments. Therefore, every Kenyan must be aware that the Somalis who are in Kenya, whether citizen or refugee, are our friends.
All right.
They have nothing to do with the waters that are of
There's a question here,
shores.
but because of time. Kenyans will be struggling with that expansionist idea. Somalia, really?
Yes.
A country that has been
Yes, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. I'll show you. I wish I had time. I'll show you a map of what the expansionist idea of Somalia is. Now, please understand, ideas don't die easy. Okay? They may not be the ideas of the majority of people, but the ideas that have been sowed in people for many years. I'll give you an example of Kenya. How many times have Kenyans talked about that Pwani si Kenya? It is an idea that was put there in the Swahili times when Zanzibar and Pemba and all those islands.
Irredentism should not be confused with the geopolitics today, because the issue of the parallel versus diagonal has nothing to do with the irredentism. And if you're talking about Kenya having its line adjusted, if that is where the ICJ rules, because I'm not on the ICJ, it'll have a ripple effect down the East African coastline all the way to the southern tip. So if you adjust it, then it sets a precedent.
That's not true. Let me tell you, no, it doesn't.
But what I don't understand,
because let me explain.
What I don't understand is why, as Kenyans, we should be whipped up into a frenzy to say, defend, so that
let's understand this. Number one, our boundary with Tanzania, we agreed on it through the same process that we took with Somalia.
We'll take it to
now,
ICJ.
let me finish what I'm saying. Let me finish. The reason why Kenyans need to be aware of this is because, number one, it makes Kenya effectively landlocked. Number two, the fishermen, the fishermen lose places to fish. That is livelihood for Kenyans.
All right. This must have
so
the last
it's not just
word
about oil.
What do you think about this row?
Well, the last time Somalia had a functional government, a solid government, was during the time of Said Barre. And Said Barre was wise enough to know that we are going to work with the latitude lines, that it's not supposed to come southeast. And that's the position as was left by our colonial masters. But the biggest tragedy we had in Kenya as Nairobi, when this crisis started, is that we let it be handled by foreign affairs then. And in Somalia and also in Kenya, that part of the world, it's the clans that have the last word. And in my view, what you should have done as a nation is to let our clans from Kenya engage with the clans from Somalia, so that you get something similar to an out-of-court settlement. But now if you go to the ICJ and it makes a ruling, whatever way it does, it's not going to be sorted. The ICJ will make a ruling, and then if it's against Kenya, what are we going to do? Then the Somalis now will have a reason to say that this is our land, this is about our patriotism. So in my view, the buck actually stops with Nairobi, with our foreign affairs. The right from the word go, they decided to go into deep slumber as Somalia was going through this thing. Because going to ICJ, it's the biggest blunder, it's a mistake. And in my view, if there's an opportunity for us even to play around and withdraw from the ICJ, then we let elders, the Somali elders from Kenya, to meet the Somali elders and get some sort of a settlement. But as Jerotish has indicated, there is no way we are going to allow anybody to take our inch. And also as a country, we cannot get an inch of another country.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. All eyes on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, CS Monica Juma and her team, Nairobi and Mogadishu, as Kenyans and Somalians continue to wait on that ruling by the International Court of Justice. Let's take another quick commercial break. Here on Inside Politics on KTN News. Don't go too far. When we come back, we'll wind up the program this Sunday with your word, your